So to begin with, can you start out kind of with where you were before you signed up for for the Marines and
Correct.
headed out to Vietnam? Can you kind of set the stage for us, talk about, what you were doing just before you decided to go?
Well, before I enlisted, I was a graduate from high school in 1967, and I went to Bemidji State University. It was a Bemidji State College at the time. They changed the name since then. And I spent 2 years at Bemidji State, and I didn't have a major declared at the time. I would just take my general education classes, and as it turned out, I had met two of my neighbor buddies. They were both home on leave from the Marine Corps, and they were both in Vietnam, both home on leave together. They're brothers, and I got to talk to them, and I was kind of excited about what they were doing, and since I didn't have a direction as far as what I wanted to major in at college, I thought, well, maybe it'd be a good idea to go enlist in the Marine Corps for a 2-year enlistment and get my GI Bill and go back to school. So I did that. I went enlisted in September of 1969, and I went active in January of 1970. And from there, I went to boot camp at MCRD San Diego, Marine Corps Recruit Depot. That was a 12-week boot camp. And after the boot camp was done, we went to Pendleton for our individual training with the big guns, bazookas and the machine guns and M16 and so on and so forth. And after that, I was assigned as a field radio operator. MOS was 2531. Field radio operator, which is actually a glorified grunt. You carry a radio with you when you're in Vietnam. Went to radio school back at MCRD in San Diego. And my first duty station after getting out of radio school was Camp Lejeune on the East Coast. I was there for 2 weeks approximately. The first week was with, I was assigned to the 2nd Tank Battalion. And for 2 weeks I was there. The first week I spent on guard duty. I never did see a tank. The second week I was I was in the mess hall washing dishes and pots and pans and stuff. And the last day of mess duty, they told me to go up and see the old man, the captain of the company commander. So I went up there and I thought, well, like I said before, did I get in trouble? Did I do something wrong? But as it turned out, the CO company commander said, Danielson, you're going Westpac. That meant you're going to Vietnam. So I was excited about that and scared at the same time. I kind of wanted to go to Vietnam. I told my commander when I first got there that if I signed up for Vietnam, would I get it, blah, blah, blah. So finally he said, you're getting Westpac, and I said I was scared and excited at the same time. So right away I got 10 days liberty, so I went back to Minnesota for 10 days and saw my buddies and told them I'm going to Vietnam. So 10 days was up. I went back to Camp Pendleton and some more individual training. And next thing you know, we're flying out of Norton Air Force Base in California, and we went to Hawaii. And from Hawaii, they gassed up the aircraft, and we flew to Okinawa, 17-hour flight to Okinawa. And we spent 3 days in Okinawa getting our BDUs, battle dress uniforms, and from there we flew into Da Nang in I Corps, northern Vietnam. And ultimately I was assigned to the 1st Marine Division, which turned out to be the 3rd Battalion, 1st Marine Division. And I was assigned to the H&S Company, which is a support company for the other 4 line companies, India, Kilo, Lima, and Mike field companies. So my first station there, duty, was TAD to the India company. I went in the field with them as a field radio operator. I set up the command post, and that was the major part of a field radio operator. And I would get with each squad, and I would go on patrol with them occasionally, set up night ambushes, and be with the line companies pretty regular. I would probably spend 8, 10, 12 days in the field with each company, and then I would get relieved. I'd go back to the battalion rear, have a hot shower and a steak dinner and drink a lot of beer back in the battalion rear, kind of unwinding, and wait for my next relief to come back out to another line company for another 8, 10 days. A lot of my time in Vietnam spent on fire support bases. They were numbered by how high the elevation was of the hills, and I can remember most of them were like the hill 810 fire support base, and I was with the 105 and the 155 batteries and all the supports, the 81 millimeter mortars and our machine gun nests, and I had my own fighting hole, night security, command posts, and that was what we did most of the time as a field radio operator. Into the field for 8, 10, 12 days, back to the rear, different line companies and different fire support bases. And that was basically my job, and as I went through my tour in Vietnam, that's basically what I did.
So did you notice or kind of get a feel for how each of these were, because you're coming in and supporting them and then leaving? Did you notice that they had a different personality or a different feel or a different, depending on what they were dealing with and what their assignments and duties were?
Well, no, I experienced the same thing they did in the field, being on patrol with them, receiving incoming, protecting each other, the brotherhood that we had. I felt the same anguish they did, the same fears. I lived with them. Basically, we were all brothers, and we were looking out for each other, and we just did the best we could with what we had to operate with.
So they were all in the heat of battle. They were all kind of dealing with the same kind of daily
stress, and we all experienced it. We looked out for each other. If we were on patrol and it was a hot, humid day, we'd help each other carrying each equipment, and they would carry batteries that I had extra with me to loosen my load, and there were times I'd carry an extra 81 millimeter round on my back just till we got to our ambush site or our command post or wherever we were setting up. And so we helped each other. It's a brotherhood that you are strong ties with.
So, do you have a luckiest day?
Oh yes.
Near miss luckiest day?
I did. I had, as a matter of fact, we were on a resupply mission one day along Highway 1, which ran north and south through Vietnam. And from our battalion rear area, we had a convoy of approximately 6, 7 trucks, resupply trucks with men on it, and ammunition and water and sea rats and cases of sea rats. And I was driving the Jeep at the time, and it's a mobile Jeep. Had a radios along the back of the side of the Jeep, and as it was north of Da Nang on Hai Van Pass area, we got ambushed. There was a mortar ambush, small arms fire, and I was very lucky. During that ambush, one of the enemy mortars landed directly in front of my Jeep, blew out the windshield of the Jeep, the dash of the Jeep, and the radiator received some damage. And that was probably the closest I'd come to a direct hit in an ambush. And of course, we bailed out of the Jeep, and one of the trucks went over the edge of the road and exploded, and nobody got hurt on that truck. They jumped out too and were safe, but from that point on, we could see where the enemy was firing at us, and we returned fire, and that incident is where I received my Combat Action Ribbon. I'm very proud of having received that Combat Action Ribbon, and that was the incident that spurred that moment.
Do you have fond memories of guys that you were with?
Oh, by all means, yes. I met some real good friends. We became real good friends from Hibbing, Minnesota. we stay in contact. We have been for the last almost 50 years. Bob Marinucci is a retired battalion fire chief in Hibbing, and we stay in contact. We golf a lot together. We have. I'll spend a couple of days up there with him. My wife and I will go up there and we'll spend time with him and his girlfriend, and we'll hang out together. Real good friends. Another fellow up in Hibbing I met in Vietnam, Orrin Bottoms. He's retired, worked in the mines up there, and Orrin and Bob and I, and through Bob's friends, we became real good friends up there. As a matter of fact, I turned 21 in Vietnam, and Bob Marinucci and some of the other guys were a little bit younger. Because I was 21, they called me Grandpa. And to this day, they still call me Grandpa when I go up there. Maybe half a dozen of the guys, friends that I met through Bob, hey Grandpa, how you doing? You know, and so that nickname still stuck with me from Vietnam, from turning 21. I was the oldest one in my platoon. The field radio operators are 25, 31 guys. I was the oldest one, 21.
So when you got your MOS, I remember you telling me that the guy said something to you like, well, you know, they're the ones who get shot first, the field radio operators.
Right. Our senior DI, the night we graduated from boot camp in San Diego, we received our orders for what our MOS, military occupational specialty, was going to be. And he hollered out Danielson, and I responded, and he said, "You're 2531 field radio operator." I had no idea what that was at the time. He said, "You're the first one to be shot," and that was quite an impression on me. When you take out the radio operator or the lieutenant or the squad leader, it kind of sets the stage for being a disarray, and we all know what we had to do, so we're all trained to replace our leaders if we have to. But that initial shock of being told you're the first one to get shot was, I didn't know what to expect at the time, but as I found out later, that school and why a radio operator is such an important job in the squad, in the company, and so I was ready for it.
So did you feel targeted like that? I mean, was that definitely a thing with you and your fellow field radio operators? You knew that you were being targeted?
Well, we camouflaged our radios as best we could. They call them PRC 77s. We would put them in our pack sack, and it looked like it was just personal gear. We had two types of antennas that we used on the radios. One was a whip antenna and one was a tape antenna. A whip antenna extends maybe 6-8 feet in the air, and it whips back and forth when you're walking. And when you're on a patrol in the grass, and the grass might be up to your waist or higher, and the enemy can see that whip antenna, so they know where the radio man is, so they'll direct the fire there. So what we did was take our tape antenna, and it was only about maybe a 2-foot tape, almost very similar to a tape that you use to measure. We would screw that into the back of the antenna, and we would fold it over, and we put it into our shirt so that you couldn't tell it was our antenna. And we generally didn't walk behind the squad leader or the second lieutenant or the officer in charge, because they knew the radio operator was right next to the lieutenant all the time. So we would alternate our locations, and I became as small a target as possible. So that's how I operated as far as being the radio man on patrol.
So if you had a luckiest day, do you have a worst day in Vietnam?
A birthday?
A worst day.
A worst day. Yes, the worst day was up again on a fire support base. We had been, they had probed our lines, our wire, and mortars, and there were a couple of guys that got killed. And when the battle was over, so to speak, this all happened at night, of course, and that's when the enemy would more often would strike. In the command post on the fire support base, I had to help load the body bags onto the medevac chopper, and that memory will always be with me, and that was bad. Later in life, when I became a conservation officer for the state of Minnesota, I had some bad incidents deer hunting, where I had to load some young people in a body bag again, load them in the ambulance, and that was instant flashback. It was bad, and I guess I've seen enough of the bad things, and having to do that in Vietnam and then do it on civilian life, it's tragic, and it's always going to affect you, and it's affected me, and bad is bad. So
can you talk about what it was like coming home for you?
Well, I came home Christmas Eve day of 1971, December 24th, and I can remember in 68, 69, even 1970, a lot of the veterans that were coming home from Vietnam were treated very, very poorly by our citizens. Of course, our nation was divided on the war, and a lot of the people took it out on the warrior and not our elected officials that sent us the war. They were called baby killers, and they were treated poorly at the airports when they returned from combat from Vietnam. They were spit at and people would throw vegetables and whatever else they had at these veterans, and they were treated poorly. In 71, when I got off the plane coming home, it wasn't as bad, although I did receive a lot of dirty looks at the airport, and I figured, well, they didn't know what we went through, why are they treating us so poorly, and although it wasn't as bad in 71 as it was in earlier years.
And so when you came home, were you able to just kind of jump into life, even though, I mean, you're still dealing with all your memories and all what happened?
Well, yeah, for me, I was able to suppress these memories, the bad stuff, and I went back to school right away. Within 10 days after being home, I was back a student at Bemidji State, and at the time, they had a BSC Vets Club on campus. And so there were about 40 of us Vietnam veterans that went back to school. We formed this club, and it was very similar to a fraternity. We had fundraisers for the college, and of course we had parties, and being with these other veterans, war combat veterans, that helped ease the transition into civilian life, so to speak. We would have meetings, and we would talk about our experiences and how we can help each other get our lives back together, and stay in school and support each other, and that was very helpful. That helped me get through a lot of academics at Bemidji State, and kind of just went on with my life, so to speak.
Is there something you think that it would be important for people to understand about Vietnam veterans and combat veterans and kind of the ongoing toll of war?
Well, war is not good. That's not the solution. Nations, I don't know how to explain it, but nations have to get along. I know they never will. There's been wars from day one, and there's war going on right now. The longest war in American history is on right now. If I had one thing to say, I would tell the American people to support the warrior. Give them all the support they can, because support from home means a lot. Letters, any type of support that they can have. That's the important thing for the warrior, to know that they are appreciated. During our recent Memorial Day this spring, I'm a member of the Cloquet Combined Honor Guard, and we visit the cemeteries. I've been a member of them for 36 years, and we honor the fallen veteran. And if I could explain one thing to the general public is that it's not a 4-day vacation to go to the cabin and go picnicking and go take 4 days off from work. It's a time to remember our veterans and the sacrifices that they've given to keep America free and strong. And that should be the priority over Memorial Day. Visit the grave sites and go to the outings that support the veterans, and that's the important part of Memorial Day. And if I could stress that to the public, that's what I would do.
Is there anything else that you feel is important that was really formative for you about all of this?
For all the vets?
Well, just from your experience. I just want to make sure that I give you a chance to say what you feel is really important about all of this experience for you.
Well, I can tell you right now, I grew up in Vietnam. I went there not knowing what to expect. In Vietnam, it's a third world culture. What you see there is something you would never expect to see in everyday life in America, back home. I grew up during my tour in Vietnam. I value life now. I know that life is so fragile and it can be taken away so quickly. And I learned in Vietnam to grow up. When I went back to school at Bemidji and at UMD, when I finally graduated from UMD, I was on the honor roll every semester because I grew up in Vietnam. And if I could tell veterans, you know, I know what you've seen, I know what you experienced. This is a new way of life now. Get on with your life. You're survived. If you need help, we're here to help you as a combat veteran. Reach out if you need help. Don't be afraid. The help is available to all combat veterans. And do the best you can.
Well said. And
Okay.
it's not like you haven't had ongoing things that you've had to deal with, but like you said, it's a new way of life, PTSD and...
Right, I'm 100% disabled, PTSD, anxiety, depression. I've learned to live with this for the most part. I got a wonderful wife that supports me. I have one son who understands some of the troubles I had been through. And I have a lot of support. I go to the vet center here in Duluth, and there's about 12 to 15 of us at the vet center. We support each other. We help each other through talking, and every week we have a 2-hour session, and that's been a lifesaver for me also, supporting. It's a good program, and I'd encourage anybody that is a combat vet that's experienced problems, don't be afraid to contact your vet center. That's what they're there for. And I just hope that our government continues to support the veteran. We were promised support when we got back from our military service, and I hope that our elected officials understand that and don't try to balance budgets on the veterans' shoulders. So it's important that they understand that our government promised us help as a veteran, and to keep that promise. That's what I would hope that continue on.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
It was just an
Well,
honor.
thank you.